Hi, and welcome back to my channel. I'd like to share with you today Darkness Dawns by Dianne Duvall. She has become one of my favorite authors. I have read several of her books, but before I get into all of that, let me tell you a little bit about the story. Dianne puts a different spin on vampires, which I truly love. It is not the classic, horror vampires or the new classic of vampires being these creatures that we just fall in love with. So I don't want to tell you too much about the story, but she does have a different take on vampires. One of the human behaviors in Darkness Dawns that I found very interesting was a trust factor. In most relationships, we get hurt and we close up, we don't want to move on, we don't want to go any further. And she takes this human behavior into one of her characters. His name is Roland Borbrook, and he's lived for so many centuries that he has a strong paranoia type of distrust for people in general because he's been betrayed. And I think we can learn a lot from that because it's through his relationship, or how his relationship develops with Sarah Bingham, the female lead in Darkness Dawns. You see how she understands and she can relate to his mistrust of people. And I think a lot of times we need to understand that. We need to understand that when we go into a relationship, it is not necessarily the first time for either one of us. There's obviously been previous relationships. Sometimes, you've heard the phrase that you can't go into a relationship with baggage from a previous relationship. Well, I don't quite believe that. And clearly in this book, neither does Dianne Duvall. There are a lot of emotions that hang with us, and no matter how much we try to eliminate them and get over them, sometimes they're still there when we go into a relationship. I believe that it's part of us to open up. It's our responsibility to open up and understand where that other person is in the relationship. And Sarah Bingham in Darkness Dawn does this. She understands that she can relate to him and be able to communicate with him in a way doesn't diminish her as a strong, independent woman, but also is able to get through his barriers just by being honest. One thing that I noticed, and I really can relate to, is the fact that both characters were honest with their emotions and they valued trust. A lot of times today, we don't value trust, and then we end up getting into relationships with people that don't value trust. Hence the reason of deep betrayals and the fact that we can't get over these things. Trust is the key to any relationship, and once that trust is broken, it's very difficult, if not rarely possible, to mend that trust again to the point of having a relationship. Now, the other human behavior with Sarah Bingham is, I love the way that she is a very strong, confident, independent woman today, but at the same time, she's comfortable with herself enough that she can express her sexuality, and by saying, no, I'm not going to just jump into a relationship or into a sexual relationship with someone that I just met. She takes the time to get to know him. And even though in the story is a bit rushed and it happens over a very short period of time, she still has her standards. She set her standards and she forced him to abide by them.
Hey everybody, so I realized that when I was editing this video, there was a word in there that could be misconstrued, and understanding that today one word can be very sensitive to some people, I wanted to take a moment and just clarify. Okay, so when I was explaining that Sarah Bingham had kept to her standards, okay, and she forced Roland to accept them. I did not mean that in the literal sense, okay? No, I do not encourage anyone to force themselves or their opinions on another person. But I do encourage you to stick to your standards and not get involved into a relationship with someone who does not respect your beliefs and standards. Because 9 times out of 10, you're going to end up in a heartache situation, and there is a completely big difference between alone and being lonely. If you're in a relationship feeling lonely, okay, because you realize later on down the line that the person that you're with didn't respect your standards or your opinions, then there's an issue. Now there's heartache, now there's baggage that is developing. So I do not encourage you, and I just wanted to repeat, I do not encourage you to force anyone to abide by your standards. Relationships are not about forcing someone to do one thing or another, or doing something that they don't want to do. But they are about respecting each other. And if you don't respect yourself enough to keep to your standards, then someone else isn't going to do that. And then we're only going to hurt ourselves through the person that we claim to love and care about. We've now put them in a position to hurt us. So we do want to clarify those things and try to understand that, again, it's not forcing, it is respecting yourself to abide by your own standards and having someone else show that they respect your standards. That respect will go a long way in a relationship.
I strongly believe that a lot of women today need to do this more. If we set our standards and we live by our standards, I believe more times than not, we will end up with the fantasy type relationship that we are looking for. You have to be able to walk away. Be strong enough to walk away if you're not getting what you need. But at the same time, you have to be strong enough to open up. I believe Dianne Duvall demonstrated very, very clearly in her characters and the character development that the two were able to overcome, to a degree, to a point, their baggage, so to speak. So through their character development, Roland was able to open himself up enough to allow Sarah in to love him, and Sarah was strong enough and independent enough to allow him in to love her, and they were able to love each other the way they each needed. So I think that is definitely a human behavior that is expressed and explained in a fiction, fantasy story that we can take and apply in reality. So I would have to say that Darkness Dawns by Dianne Duvall would be a wow factor book for me. The way, again, the way Dianne developed her characters, the way she made them very relatable. One other thing that I hadn't mentioned earlier, the syntax of the book really, really demonstrates the time periods as to which Roland came from and Sarah is born in, and I thought that was very, very believable. When Roland speaks, he gives a hint of the time period that he was born in, and I believe it's harder to relate to a character who has lived for centuries when they sound more modern. But if there's hints of their time period, hints of their history, that makes a character much more relatable, much more believable, because if they live during that time, they're going to have traits and beliefs, things that have transcended from one time period to the next. So I thought that was done very well. Very, very believable. Don't forget to leave me a comment on what you thought of the book or what you think of my opinions, and don't forget to subscribe.